I'm James W. Freston. I live on Kiowa Island, South Carolina. That's just off the Charleston coast. And I was AGA president in 1995 and 6.
So could you give us a brief background on how you got into the medical field and also gastroenterology in specific?
Well, I got into medical school or medical field because that's what I wanted to do in high school. And because my role model was the family physician right down the street, in fact. And I used to caddy at a golf course where there are many doctors, and I admired them, particularly my family doctor down the street. And then I went on to college on a football scholarship, actually, but completed pre-med and then decided to try to skip the 4th year of college and get an early admission to medical school, which I did. And after that, I went into internal medicine, finished a residency, and decided at that point that gastroenterology was an exciting field that I wanted to pursue. I admired greatly the intellectual pursuits that I saw in fields like nephrology, especially, and cardiology, and I could see that gastroenterology was right on the cusp of basically a scientific revolution. And so I went into a GI fellowship. After that, I completed a liver fellowship with Sheila Sherlock in London. And when I was a fellow, I joined the AGA and have been an AGA member ever since.
So tell me a little bit about the scientific revolution that you were expecting and what you've seen over the course of your career.
Well, the field has transformed enormously. When I was a resident and a fellow, gastroenterology seemed to me like was mostly a game of intuitions and hunches with very little diagnostic capabilities behind eyes and ears. Not that they're unimportant, but there weren't any lab tests. There were very few imaging procedures available, only fluoroscopy basically and straight x-rays of the abdomen. But at that time, the discovery of insulin and its importance and the role of the pancreas that was played in producing insulin, secretin had been discovered, and its myriad effects throughout the digestive system. It was all that information was starting to leak out into our residency and early in our fellowship, which made it intellectually more exciting for me and other colleagues that I knew in the same situation. So we migrated into GI as the field of the future. And then I always loved liver disease. But I went into liver disease primarily because of opportunity. There were very few hepatologists. I was at the University of Utah at the time. There was only one, there were no hepatologists between Denver and the West Coast. And I thought, well, if I'm going to be in this area, I may as well become a hepatologist as well. And that was, I like the field, still do. And that's what I do mostly now. But I calculated in opportunity in a major way, which I had not done so much in gastroenterology.
That's interesting. What would you tell someone who's considering a career in gastroenterology today?
Well, I would say go for it. It has everything. It has high intellectual appeal. It has an array of fun and helpful procedures, unlike when I started out. So and it has a very firm basis in science, with lots of young investigators and more mature investigators turning out innovations and discoveries on a regular basis. So it's hard for me to imagine a field that has more diversity and opportunity intellectually and procedurally than gastroenterology.
So you mentioned that you joined the AGA when you were a fellow. I'm interested to hear about your journey with AGA and how you came to be on the governing board and eventually president.
My journey to the governing board and AGA presidency actually began in my fellowship when I was encouraged by my mentor to join the AGA as a fellow, and I went to national meetings, which I thought were astonishingly interesting and stimulatory. I loved seeing the leaders in gastroenterology sitting on the first and second row and commenting on the presentations. It was a real thrill for me, and I was deeply impressed. And then I was just a regular member for years until I got a very important call from then president of the AGA, David Alpers. I was lying in bed in a ski resort in Vermont when David Alpers called me and asked me if I would chair up a new endeavor of the AGA, and this was the what I call the Public Affairs Committee. It was basically the liaison and Public Affairs Committee, and start to develop a program to advocate for more research in digestive diseases. So I told him that I'd be interested in that, and so that was my first deep involvement in the AGA, was chairman of that committee. And that was exciting because we hadn't done that before, the AGA. And so I spent a lot of time in Washington testifying before congressional committees for more funding for digestive diseases. And we developed a cadre of people doing similar stuff. It was a very exciting time for us. And that laid the groundwork for what we call today the AGA Political Action Committee. Well, I did that for 4 years, actually. And I'm sure that's led to my nomination to become president of the AGA. I can't prove that, but I'm sure that was influential. So then I was elected to the presidency, and then really fun things started to happen. But that's how I got involved in the AGA in a deep level, thanks to President David Alpers, and I'm indebted to him to this very day.
I'm talking to him next week, so I will mention that you and I connected.
Give him my regards.
I will. So what do you recollect from your time as president? What kind of issues was AGA focused on at the time?
Well, we were in the early stages of raising money, substantial amounts of money for research. We hadn't done that in a serious way. So we set out to make presentations, particularly to industry, which had not been done in a substantial way before. And we raised lots of money that we used to fund GI programs, and including and especially scholarships for fellows who wanted to pursue early careers in research. That was very important time. I remember one time when we put together a game plan to go make a presentation to a pharmaceutical company. Then it was called TAP, TAP, which eventually became Takeda, and a long-term relationship with the AGA that probably endures to this day. But we went out there with our dog and pony show, and we decided we'd really be aggressive and ask for $5 million to fund research. That seemed audacious at the time. Well, we made our presentation, and the CEO of TAP said, okay, we can do that. Well, on the way to the airport, our chief, our administrative secretary at the time, whose name was Robert Greenberg, he kind of grumbled in the back of the car and said, we should have asked for 7 million. Well, now, of course, we raise multiples of that. But that blazed the trail for us soliciting money on a huge scale for research. That was an exciting time, but I'll tell you, one of the most difficult times in my presidency for me personally, and it was hard for the entire GI board, related to what I like to call the board meeting from hell. That was a board meeting, I would chair it in Palm Springs, Florida, at the Breakers Hotel there. There was a serious issue on the agenda, and that was whether or not we were going to force Tachi Yamada, who was the nominated and selected president-elect, if we were going to force him to resign from the board because he had joined the corporate board of I believe it was SmithKline French at that time. It may have been GlaxoSmithKline, but one of those other companies. He was now on the corporate board while he was in the presidential succession. Well, some of the blue bloods, the old timers, basically thought that we could never tolerate that. That was perhaps a conflict of interest and maybe unethical to be in the same business as even the same room with corporations. You have to understand that the AGA in those days was really regarded itself as lily white pure. We would never, for example, consider having a board meeting or an AGA conference in Las Vegas. That was considered somewhat sinful. But anyway, the board had to decide if they were going to force Tachi Yamada to resign because of the perceived conflict of interest. Serendipitously, the ASGE was having board meetings in the same area. So we decided to have a meal together with the board of the ASGE. So we all assembled at a fish restaurant called Nick's Fish, I believe it was at that time. So we were all there and we were eating outdoors. It was a lovely evening. Up until that point. Well, the service was appallingly poor. The fish was slow to arrive, and then we were seated on round tables. They'd deliver a meal to some people at the table, and then there'd be a long delay before they serve fish to the others. Meanwhile, the first people to get the fish were watching their fish grow cold. Well, Bob Greenberg, so it was a very uncomfortable, unpleasant meal to say the least. Turned out that Bob Greenberg decided that he wasn't going to pay for it. Well, we didn't know that at the time, but we all got in our vans and buses and headed back to the hotel. Well, in the middle of the night, the sheriff came to arrest whoever was in charge. Well, that turned out to be Bob Greenberg. He took the hit, had to go down to the police station, and of course he settled the bill. But meanwhile, the next day we had to take up the very serious issue of whether or not Tashi Yamada was going to be booted out of the presidential succession. It was very tense. There were arguments on both sides. I understood both, but eventually I tried to convey neutrality on the whole issue because I was basically conflicted about it. But having heard the arguments, I tipped my hand and said, I think we should do this, and I think Tachi Yamada will be a great president. Well, they agreed, and Tachi Yamada was a great president and did incredible things thereafter. So that's a story that I haven't shared with people other than those who were present at the time. I call it the board meeting from hell. That was the only unpleasant experience in my entire tenure. The rest of it was absolutely glorious. We also decided at that time, because we were able to raise money, to create a foundation. And we did. We started a foundation and then started another one. The second one was with ASGE and AASLD, a three-way thing. And we were able to raise money, but it was the governing structure was hopeless. We had our own foundation board, but each of the societies had their own boards, and so they were second guessing us, and the societies were sort of squabbling over what share of the pie they deserved based on membership or revenue or other considerations. So finally that fell apart. And today, of course, we've got the AGA Foundation, had it ever since, and it's been a huge success. But that movement basically started during my tenure in the presidential succession. Those are a few exciting things. My involvement with AGA continued. I'm pleased to say that I was, after I'd left the president's, the governing board, I was asked to be founding director of what's called DDCEP, Digestive Disease Education Program or System, DDCEP. I've forgotten what it stands for, but it was a multimedia, computer-based self-education program that had all sorts of features that are common today, but weren't then. For example, you could see the actual liver biopsy that related to the case that we presented. At the end, there was an examination. And I was very pleased to see the other day that DDCEP 10 is now coming out. So it apparently it has endured, and I was proud of that and thankful that the AGA board at the time asked me to undertake that project. It kept me active in the AGA doing something that I really cared about, and that's educating all the young people in our field. Well, I've gone on a bit, but that was basically the essence of my presidency.
You've definitely left your mark on AGA as president. I wasn't aware of the DDCEP connection, but advocacy and the foundation and support for fundraising is still such a large part of our mission. So thank you for everything you've done for AGA. I'm curious, we know how you've left your mark on AGA. I'm curious how AGA has left its mark on you as president, or as being involved in AGA personally. How has AGA affected you personally?
mostly through the friendships that I developed, mostly among members of the governing board during my tenure on the board, and then after in my, as I helped with fundraising in the foundations that I chaired and developing DDCEP. Without doubt, those friendships and the networks that flowed from those friendships enriched my life beyond measure. You said you've done a lot for AGA. Well, AGA did a lot for me. And quite frankly, it tickles me that a friend of mine in my church here in South Carolina told me that, asked me if he could go to my conference. And I said, what are you talking about? This was about 4 or 5 years ago. He said, well, the James W. Freston single topic conferences, I see that you have. Well, I wasn't even aware of that at the time, but that was established and endowed by Takeda, which had its roots way back there, or our roots with Takeda went way back to our presentation at TAP, asking them for $5 million. So I was typical and honored to see that. Then, of course, the Friedenwald Medal was arguably the high point of my entire academic career, professional career. So it did a lot more for me than I did for it.
What's your hope for AJ's future?
I've always been concerned that we would become too practice-oriented at the expense of emphasizing science, innovations, and discoveries, i.e. research. I've always felt we need to be balanced. In the early days, we needed to be more attentive to the needs of our clinicians. And I think we've got good balance right now. But I do worry that with all the emphasis on healthcare delivery and cost effectiveness, and that we might lose our way. I hope we don't. We have to stick with science, in my opinion.
Thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to share that I haven't covered in my questions today?
AGA presents opportunities for self-improvement. I've experienced it throughout my career, and I cannot imagine a field that is better suited for people like me who love the practice of medicine, taking care of patients, and also appreciate the importance of discovery, innovation, and research in general. Please, young people, come to gastroenterology. You'll find a home that you'll love, just like I do.